Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this ongoing discussion. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to another edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Pardon me for a moment. Took a mouthful of coffee and choked on it, and I apologize for that. We are on a Tuesday. It is the first day of October. It is, as you know, I'm sure, a day when the federal government is in lockdown, shutdown of whatever that means. It's a little bit difficult at this point. The president made a comment today during a press conference from the Rose Garden, pointed out that as this thing went on from day to day, it would become worse and worse and worse. I've heard a number of people make comments this morning and said, you know, the government's been shut down now since midnight. It's been 12 hours or 14 hours, and I haven't noticed any difference yet. And, of course, the fact of the matter is they will. And the reality is that many of the people who are working are doing it without pay because they feel a degree or a sense of commitment to this. They are public servants. They are civil servants in the classic sense of the word, and they feel that their obligation doesn't end just because their elected representatives can't seem to agree on what day of the week it is. But you know, it raises some serious questions, and I think we here at the Virtual Center need to address a few of these issues today. I don't know that we'll spend the entire program on it, but I really believe that we would be remiss if we didn't touch on something about it related to the Constitution. I might say each day I encourage people to not only call while we're on the air live, but also to send me emails. And I did receive an email from a listener this morning on the issue of the Constitution as it relates to the government shutdown, and I wanted to address what's in that email and address one or two issues related to the shutdown. And of course, naturally, I invite your opinion, your comments, your suggestions, or whatever. I don't claim to have anything monumental or earth-shattering to say beyond what everybody else says about the situation. But I think it's very, very important that we spend a little bit of time addressing the issues of the day, especially when they relate so directly to the Constitution of the United States, and that we mull over these issues. I might say that, as an aside, I just 15 minutes ago read this story. So I grew up in Boston, as many of you know, and I grew up watching. When I grew up and watched basketball, I grew up watching the Boston Celtics when Bob Cousy was their point guard. And I know that there are a number of people out there that may not have even heard the name Bob Cousy, and some people did. And remember that he was a player from a long time ago. There's a story on the front page of today's Boston Globe, and you can get it if you go online to boston.com. There's a story on the front page about Bob Cousy, who recently lost his wife of 63 years. And of course, you know, I'm blown away by the mere fact that Bob Cousy is now 85 years old. And I can still see number 14 going up and down the parquet floor at the old Boston Garden. You know, and I can remember when I went to graduate school in the Midwest at the University of Wisconsin in 1965. I remember, and that was when the Celtics were at the peak of their, they were winning championship after championship. They were kind of like the Yankees are in baseball in the minds of many people. And when I went out to the Midwest, I remember that friends that I made out there, we used to watch basketball games together on Sunday afternoons. And more often than not, the game of the week was the Celtics because they were always in first place. Everybody wanted to beat the Celtics. That was when Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell were playing, if you remember those names. Anyway, there's a story on the front page of the paper today about Bob Cousy, about the loss of his wife of 63 years, who passed away recently. And it's just a story that, and I don't think you have to be a Bob Cousy fan or anything else to appreciate the sensitivity of this story, but it's about the fact that the last 10 years of her life, she was suffering from extreme dementia. And he never, during all of that time, he never asked for assistance. His daughters are quoted in the story about he just took care of her, and he points out that whereas most relationships between husbands and wives tend to be strongest at the front end, his was just the opposite, because when they were married, he was a basketball player and he was on the road a lot, and then after his playing days are over, he was a coach and he was a broadcaster and he used to travel a lot. And so their time together became closer and closer and much more meaningful to both of them as they grew older. And when she became sick about 11 to 12 years ago and started to have problems with dementia, he just kind of moved in and took over. And the article is about how he basically arranged to get everything done and at the same time make sure that she believed that a lot of it was her. She felt productive right up to the very end because of the way he handled it. And his point, there's a line in there that's just amazing. And he said, how as the years went on, they became closer and closer. And he made the comment that for the last 20 years of their marriage, they held hands the whole 20 years. And it's just an absolutely wonderful, wonderful story. And I just read it about 15 minutes before we went on the air, and I'm still kind of a little bit teary over it. And again, you don't have to be a Bob Cousy fan to appreciate the sensitivity of this story. But anyway, it's kind of an offshoot. Talk about opposite ends of the spectrum. To talk about the government shutdown and the inability of our elected representatives to fulfill their obligations as elected officials and civil servants on the one hand, and then you talk about this relationship between this couple who were together for 63 years on the other. It's kind of like extremes in a lot of ways, and I don't know whether that's a negative or a positive. Maybe that says a lot about what we're trying to do here at the Virtual Center. I encourage you to pick up the phone and give us a call. We have a number that will get you on the air. Really look forward to your comments, your suggestions, your ideas, and reactions to the shutdown. We'll be talking about that at least during the first part of our program today. The phone number is area code 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. My personal email address, if you'd like to email me directly, is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906, all one word, no punctuation, @gmail.com. And at some point during our program today, we'll get back to the issue of rights that we talked about yesterday. I had a few what I think are very, very meaningful comments about yesterday's program from one from a listener, and this morning in a senior citizens class that I teach on Tuesday mornings, I shared with my class the issues that we dealt with yesterday in the area of rights, and senior citizens found that that whole issue particularly informative and interesting, and I shared that with them this morning, so it's still fresh in my mind, and I kind of wanted to revisit that and take it maybe to the next step, if that's indeed possible. But first, let's take a moment. We're at 9 minutes after the hour. Let's take a moment and address the issue of the government shutdown. I'm not going to talk about the politics of it because I don't want our program to become a discussion of the political ins and outs and ups and downs and goods and bads of the day necessarily. I want to maintain the focus and the rationale for this program. And I believe that later on this evening on the Head On Radio Network, Bob Kincaid is probably going to hear all he can handle about the shutdown from his listeners. I imagine that they're quite upset about it, as well they should be. I know Bob is, and I am. But let me take a moment to share with you the email that I received on the shutdown. And as I say that, I'm trying to put my hands on the email. I printed it off. And naturally, I put it in a place which is not readily available. So I may have to do a little moving around, but if I do, I'll be right back. I apologize for the delay, and I can't seem to lay my hands on the email, but let me address what I think is the gist of it. I thought it was a pretty solid piece on the government shutdown, and I wanted to share it with you. I was going to basically read excerpts of it here, but it would take me a while to print off another copy, and I'm not going to take the time to do that. So let me, as best I can, paraphrase and kind of review what I think the article said. The basic premise was that recently a similar kind of situation where government became dysfunctional occurred in Canada. And it was over the budget, just as this one seems to be over the budget. I would suggest to you there is serious question as to whether this is about the budget at all. I personally believe that most of it is about Barack Obama, but be that as it may. The Canadian government experienced a similar kind of situation where a very conservative prime minister, whose last name was Harvey, had a particular set of priorities related to spending and related to funding. And he was confronted by a plurality in the legislature which disagreed with him. And the fact of the matter is it ended up to be an impasse. The point of the email is that the result of that email was a little bit different than the result of such an impasse in our government today. And the basic gist of the article was that we are locked into a system by our Constitution which really doesn't give us the prerogatives or the opportunities to do anything meaningful to resolve the situation. That the first opportunity for the citizens of this country to do anything about this situation comes in the elections next fall of November 2014, when we are offered the opportunity to go to the polls and re-elect members of Congress. And so, in theory, that's the first opportunity that we have to do anything about this. So, in a sense, the gist of the article was that we are kind of locked into a situation where we watch government become totally dysfunctional and unable to govern. And so the comparison between the two systems, between the British parliamentary system of democracy and our system of democracy, becomes the focus of the email that Gene Penn sent to me this morning. And that's what I wanted to address to you, is a little bit of, try to explain as best I can, a little bit about the differences between the two political systems. And his point was that the mere fact that the Canadian government was unable to pass a budget created a constitutional crisis. In other words, it created a situation where government was unable to function. And the way that the Constitution was written, when that kind of thing happened, then it immediately sparked a general election. And in that general election, the Prime Minister at the time was able to secure a majority in Parliament and thereby enact his budgetary priorities because he had a party, a friendly party, in control of the legislature, and the constitutional crisis was resolved. In our political situation, of course, it's quite different. And, you know, our Constitution sets up quite a different scenario. And part of the rationale, part of the reason for this is the nature of our representative democracy as opposed to Great Britain's and Canada's and the others within the so-called British Commonwealth system. The word that I'd like to introduce, so the idea, the concept that I would like to introduce as the only way that I can reasonably explain this in a way that makes sense to me, is the issue of responsibility versus non-responsibility. I would suggest to you that the difference between the Canadian system, the British system, the Australian system, and other such representative democracies in the West, and our system, is based on the idea of responsible party government. We have two parties. Many of these other systems have at least two parties. Many of them have many more. And of course, the idea of a multi-party system where there are more than two parties, and of course we have throughout our history we've had occasion when we have third-party movements and four parties and five parties, etc., that run. But the reality is only the two major parties have a chance to win in national elections. But these other multi-party systems operate in a way where that is not the case. And frequently what happens as a result of elections is that no party is successful in achieving a majority over the legislative body of that particular nation. And the result is that the only way that government can govern is to fashion coalitions between the different parties. Find ways that different political parties can join together and form coalition governments and agree to vote together in such a way that government becomes operable, government becomes possible. That's the major difference in terms of procedure between our government and these other multi-party governments. But the real issue that makes it all happen is the issue of responsible party government. Now, what do I mean by responsible party government? What I mean is that government is responsible for enacting the program or the agenda on which it runs, on which it goes to the voters and requests support. Unlike our two-party system, responsible parties in these other democracies are committed to enacting particular agendas, a particular set of priorities that they promise they will enact if elected. So the difference between those systems and ours is that when voters in those systems vote, they know what they're voting for. In our system, in our two-party system, for all practical purposes, we don't know what we're voting for because we're not voting for party agendas or platforms. We're voting for particular candidates. Our system is candidate-focused, whereas their system is agenda-focused. And so the fact of the matter is, when the voters go to the polls and elect a party in a particular party in a responsible system to govern, they do so with every expectation that that particular party will enact its agenda, its platform, when elected. And if it's necessary for that party to form a coalition with another party in order to create a working majority so that government can govern, then certain negotiations go on with that, with that particular party platform. But the reality is that as closely as possible, the party will adhere to the platform. So the issue in those elections comes down to the fact that in those systems, voters are voting for issues, not candidates. In those systems, the candidate becomes relatively unimportant because the candidate is committed to support the party platform or the party agenda. If that particular party wins the election, then the representative of that party is committed to support the agenda on which he or she was elected. So elections function and focus principally around issues, not around candidates. Our two-party system is quite different. For all practical purposes, our major parties are what I would call non-responsible. And what that means is it's always a little bit up in the air as to what the candidates we vote for really support. And part of the reason is because our whole election system functions around them rather than what they will do or not do when and if they get elected. So our politics tend to be personality-driven, whereas these other systems tend to be issue-driven. And that's why those systems are usually assigned the label responsible parties, governments, because when the party wins, all the voters know what's going to happen. Not only the people who support them, but the losing parties, the voters who supported other parties, know that if they lose the election, they're going to face, an agenda that they didn't vote for. But they lost, and the argument is that you come back and you do the same thing next time. And, of course, what happens is the parties exercise discipline. Party leaders are committed to enacting the party platform if they get elected. So, therefore, they have to keep the members of the party in line. They have to achieve and establish discipline within the party. You can't go to people and ask for their votes on a particular agenda of issues, and then once you win, turn the elected representative loose to do whatever they want to do in the legislature. So these parties tend to be much more tightly organized, much more disciplined, and party leaders have much greater control over the members of the party. So therefore, it becomes much easier to predict votes, to predict electoral outcomes on issues, because you can pretty well count your votes. You know basically that members of your party, chances are going to vote the party line. And that creates a sense of creates a sense of security and predictability within the political process itself. And of course, in these systems, it is usually written that if something happens and there's a breakdown, if government can't govern for whatever reason, then that becomes a signal for an election. And the voters are called to go to the polls and re-elect their the party of their choice. And so the fact of the matter is voters know what the issues are. In our system, because it is so candidate-focused, so personality-focused, that more often than not, we get candidates elected who end up surprising us once they get into office. And chances are that these people have run for office, have campaigned in a way which is focused primarily on not giving us access to the kind of information we need in order to know what they'll do if they get elected. All the candidates of all the parties that run, they all tend to be for and against the same things. They're all for peace. They're all for responsible spending. They're all opposed to running up the deficit. They're all in favor of a strong national defense. They're all in favor of a growing economy. They're all in favor of lower inflation. They're all in favor of responsible health care and a health care system. They're all responsible for improved quality education. They're all in favor of such and such. In other words, every one of them is for all the right things and against all the wrong things. So therefore, it's very, very difficult to make a determination on a particular candidate based on the issues. More often than not, the issues don't give us the distinctions we need in order to make decisions between candidates or parties. Now that you have to accept that with a grain of salt, because in general way we know that the Republican Party tends to support policies and programs and particular pieces of legislation that are much more conservative than our liberal Democrats. We know that. And so what we know is that if the Democrats win the control of the national government, the programs and the particulars of the programs that the Democratic Party endorses are probably going to be left of center. And if the Republicans win control of the national government, we can fully expect that the issues and the policies that they endorse will be somewhat right of center. We know that. But the fact of the matter is, in order to get majorities, in order to basically govern effectively, for most of the nation's history, whether the national government is under control of one party or the other, it usually happens that the agenda pursued by either party, while it's either right of center or left of center, depending on which party it is, never veers too far from the center. Because chances are that the only effective way to govern is to be able to attract enough people from the other party to cross the line, to cross the aisle, so to speak, and support your particular issues. And that works both ways. And so the reality is the only way that you're going to get bipartisanship is if the particular issues supported by either party are not too far from the center. Granted, they're going to be right or left, depending on which party we're talking about. But to be effective and to remain bipartisan, they can't be too far from the center. Because the fact of the matter is Republicans must attract moderate Democrats, and Democrats must attract moderate Republicans. The Republicans have no more chance of attracting support from extreme liberals in the Democratic Party than Democrats do in attracting extreme conservatives and Tea Party advocates from the Republican Party. In other words, whether you're talking right of center or left of center, liberal or conservative, those that sit on the extremes on either side are likely not going to cross over. But effective government lies toward the center. And so while the American people, the voters, know that a Republican administration is more often than not going to be right of center, and a Democratic administration is going to be left of center, they also have the security in knowing that in neither case are they ever going to veer too far from center, because if they do that, they'll lose their ability to govern because they won't be able to attract enough moderates to cross the aisle. So the nature of our political system from the very beginning has been focused on building consensus. Elections, the nature of our two-party system tends to drive the voters toward the center, whether they be conservative or whether they be liberal. They're going to be focused somewhere near the center of the political spectrum. And so while their leanings may be right of center or left of center, they're never going to be too far from center, because the ability to the ability to govern is focused on the ability to remain centrist. And that way you build the kind of bipartisanship that makes consensus possible, that makes compromise possible, that makes negotiation possible, and makes it possible for government to govern. The situation that we face in America right now, in the United States, is in some ways unprecedented. It's not totally unprecedented, but it suggests a degree of dysfunctionalism within our two-party system, which we haven't had all that much experience dealing with. I don't like to be the bearer of bad news, but the fact of the matter is, if you look back to American politics prior to the Civil War, the issue of slavery was the closest that this political system came to the state that we're in right now. Once you had a political situation in this country where one section of the country was focused in one direction and the other section of the country was focused in the other, based principally on the issue of slavery, the potential for dysfunction was increased tremendously. What we reached in America in 1860, in the election of 1860 with Abraham Lincoln, was an election campaign where the losers could not live with the results if they weren't the winners. The South made it very clear before people went to the polls in the election of 1860 that if Abraham Lincoln won this election, they had no alternative but to to withdraw from the Union. The die was cast. There was no compromise. Because Lincoln's position, Lincoln's platform, the platform of the Republican Party was that while Lincoln promised the South that even if he was elected, if the Republicans won control of the national government, there was no plans, they had no plans to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it already existed, because of their commitment to the principles of private property, and slaves were property. But Lincoln also said that if the Republicans won the election, if he won the White House, he was going to make sure that slavery no longer expanded into the territories of the United States. In other words, there would be no more slave states than there currently were in the Union in 1860. So all the territories in the West would be non-slave when they came into the Union and applied for statehood. From the South's point of view, that was a death sentence, because the only way that the South could maintain political leverage within the Union up to that point was to maintain an equal number of states with the North. From 1815 on, from the end of the War of 1812 on, it became very clear to John C. Calhoun and other prominent Southerners that the South was not going to control the national government, because it became very clear once the Northwest Territory was opened up, once the Indian threat was eliminated, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, if you remember, in the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. The national government is eliminating the Indian threat in the Northwest Territories, which at that time, the Northwest Territories included Ohio and Indiana and Illinois and Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa, and that was the Northwest Territory, what we call today the Midwest. Excuse me. And once the Native American, once the Indian threat was removed from those territories, then settlement from overseas began to increase tremendously into those areas because there was land available there. And it became very clear to the South that the flow of population was toward the North, towards the non-slaveholding states, not towards the South. Early on, in the late 18th century, Madison, Jefferson, and the rest of them believed that the South had a good chance of controlling the Union because it looked like the South's climate was attracting more settlers than the North. But part of the reason that was happening is because it was unsafe for settlers to go into the North because of the Indian threat. Once the federal government, once the creation of a standing army eliminated the Indian threat in the Northwest Territory, settlers flowed into there. So it was very obvious that state after state after state that was going to emerge out of these territories was going to be non-slave. It became very clear that the population of the United States was going to be non-slave, the majority population. Therefore, it became very clear that the non-slaveholding states, the North, was going to control the House of Representatives because they were going to have most of the population. At that point, and we're talking early 19th century here, at that point, Calhoun and the other spokesmen for Southern strategies began to realize that the South's only hope was to maintain an equal number of states so that the two Southern senators from each state could effectively block legislation, negative legislation in Congress. No matter how many congressmen the North had over and above the number that the South had, the way the Constitution was written, no law could become a law unless it passed both houses of Congress. So as long as the South could maintain an equal number of states with the North, the South effectively had a veto power over the Congress, which is what we've got right now with the filibuster. The South didn't have the votes to pass anything that it wanted, but it had enough votes to make sure that the North couldn't pass anything because they couldn't get it through the Senate. So from this time on, American history through the 19th century, up until the Civil War, up until 1860, was dominated by a series of compromises. We remember in our grade school books we had to memorize the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act and all of these pieces of legislation. And if you remember them at all, you remember that most of them functioned around the idea that if an additional state came into the North, then there would be a corresponding slave state. In other words, the Missouri Compromise was slavery would be allowed in Missouri. So Missouri would become a slave state, which would give the South one extra state. But at the same time, Maine was separated from Massachusetts, and Maine came in as a free state in order to maintain the balance between free states and slave states. And that became the South's strategy throughout the first half of the 19th century, is to maintain its voting power in the Senate. But Lincoln's election jeopardized, threatened all of that, because Lincoln's position was, the Republican Party's position was, that if they won the election of 1860, slavery would not be allowed to expand into any additional territories, which meant that there would be no longer be any new southern slaveholding states. On the contrary, there would be an infinite number of non-slaveholding states, free states, coming into the Union. From the South's point of view, if the slave system could not expand, it was doomed to die. And so from their point of view, the election of 1860 was a clear-cut referendum on the future of the institution of slavery. If Lincoln won the election, the South believed it had no choice but to leave the Union. So in a sense, what does that mean? What that means is that when a real crisis situation faced the nation in 1860, where the nation literally was in the process of being torn apart over one of the most emotional issues to ever confront the people of this nation, our two-party system was unable to handle it. Because our two-party system was built around the idea of driving public opinion, voter preferences, the preferences of the two major parties toward the center. That's where elections were won or lost, was in the center. Because that's where compromise and negotiation was possible. Both parties knew that if you adopted a platform that appealed only to the extreme wing of your party, you couldn't win. The only way you could win was to massage your platform in such a way that it appeared centrist, at least centrist enough to attract members of the other party to cross the aisle and support your positions on certain issues. And that worked both ways. But when it came to a divisive issue like slavery, which literally threatened to rip the nation apart, our two-party system was incapable of dealing with it. It became very clear that our two-party system could only work when the issues were not dramatically different. And that's the situation we have today. We have a situation today where the two parties have allowed themselves to become so far apart that each side is putting the pressure on the moderates to take a position. Each side is criticizing moderation. Each side is forcing those that want to be in the middle, that don't want to be associated with one philosophy or the other, to take a position. And each side is attacking the spine and the backbone of those who insist on being moderates. And it's become very clear in the last few years that whenever a candidate of either party refuses to toe the line of the extremists within his party or her party, out-of-state money will flood into the next election and cost those people their election. How many prominent members of the House and Senate in the last 10 to 15 years have been defeated? Senator Lugar, for example, of Indiana, and many others, prominent, prestigious members of our legislature who have been beaten by the influx of out-of-state money, who are coming in because they were deemed to be too moderate, not loyal enough, not committed enough, not ideologically fixed enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have had prominent members of the House and Senate, even if they weren't defeated at the in elections, refuse to run for re-elections because they don't want to function in this kind of a political environment. I'm thinking of Olympia Snowe in Maine, for example, who is a Republican who has been one of the most prestigious Republicans for many, many years. She's been a moderate. She's been one of the Republicans that the Democrats in the Senate could count on if their positions were reasonable and centrist enough. But she made the decision not to run for re-election because she felt like the Senate, the government, the Congress was becoming too ideologically driven, too separated. It was becoming impossible to have friends in the other party, et cetera, et cetera. We go on and on and on with this is what's happening in our system. So the fact of the matter is our system is currently breaking down, and we see it over this government shutdown and the potential of the default on America's debt situation in the middle of this current month of October. The target date is about the 17th of October. At that point in time, Congress is going to have to increase the ceiling in order to meet its financial obligations. And the threat to not just our economy, but to world economies is incredible. And so now both sides are engaging in name-calling, which is the last thing that you want to see happen if there's going to be compromise or some sort of a deal reached. One of the most frightening things I heard this morning was the fact that spokesmen for both parties were saying publicly that once the shutdown happened at midnight last night, the parties were in a no-win situation if they backed down. In other words, if one side or the other backed down, then the shutdown was going to be blamed on them. So the reality is that both parties kind of, reconfirmed their commitment to their ideals and their position and tended to blame the others. And so the fact of the matter is, I would suggest to you, in spite of the fact that this article that I received via email this morning suggests that the problem lies with the Constitution of the United States, I would suggest to you that the principal part of the problem lies with the nature of our two-party system. Madison believed in Federalist Number 10 and talked about this. We've talked about this ad infinitum, it seems to me, but Madison's position is that the stability of our political system was based on the fact that there were a multiplicity of factions, that there were so many different factions that no one faction could take over and control. And, of course, the faction that he was most worried about was the majority faction, which was the poor. But the basic premise, his basic premise was that America's stability was based on having a multiplicity of factions. Because if no one faction had the power to take over control, then the result would be that the competition among factions for influence would be such that it would create, for lack of a better term, inertia. And the system would be able to continue to function. We have reached a situation where, and again, I think the media is partly responsible for this. I think modern technology is partly responsible for this. That ultimately what we're doing, we're conducting our campaigns on a national level rather than a local level. The old idea of members of congressional districts running for election and re-election in their own district and standing for issues that their constituents care about is breaking down. Our elections are becoming national elections. And each party is being driven to a large extent by political ideologues on either end of the political spectrum. Extreme liberals on the one hand, Tea Party conservatives on the other. And so the fact of the matter is that they have been able to so separate Congress that instead of most of the votes congregating toward the center, most of the members have been forced to move towards the extremes on either side. And the center has effectively been abandoned, which means compromise is abandoned, which means negotiation is abandoned, which means consensus is abandoned, which means government can't govern. Because each side has created an ideological worldview where if it can't win, it will prevent the other side from winning as well. And winning has become what it's all about. The difference between our political system and those responsible systems in other democracies around the world is that voters are voting issues. And the basic premise of these systems is that the number one priority is that government continue to govern. And if something happens where government can't govern, then there usually is a call for a national election. And it's not a campaign that drags out for 2.5 years. Our campaigns do because candidates have to sell themselves. But in those democracies where people are voting on issues, on agendas, on platforms, you can have a crisis in government and the call for an election, and you can hold the election in 10 days. Because all that's necessary is that each party be able to get out its position papers so that the people will know what they're voting for. In our system, the voter has no idea what he's voting for. He's voting for the candidate he trusts. He's voting for the candidate who will seem to be more willing to look you in the eye rather than look away from you. He's forced to vote for or against the candidate with the biggest smile, or the candidate whose apology appears to be most sincere, or the candidate who belongs to the right clubs, or the candidate who's a good church member, or who's a good parent and a good spouse, who's able to pose for pictures with his family and his kids and his mother-in-laws and in-laws and all the rest of it. In other words, church-going family people is what we're looking for. So every candidate in the world spends the money they make in fundraising to paint an image of themselves so that they will appear to conform to what the voter wants. In fact, they may not conform to that at all. We've seen scandal after scandal after scandal where candidates have been found to be having affairs and all of these other things. But the point is their campaign paints them as straight and narrow parents and spouses and grandparents and members of the Scouts and members of loyal members of churches and contributors to charity campaigns and all the rest of it. And so candidates are in the business of selling themselves, selling an image to the voters, and the voters are in the impossible position of being asked to vote for candidates who won't tell them where they stand on the controversial issues. Because in this political system, your positions don't win you votes, your positions lose you votes. And the only way you can stand a chance to win election or to win re-election is to not lose support. And the way to not lose support is to never allow yourself to be painted into a corner on issues. The system rewards fudging and obfuscation and double talking and all the rest of it. For a long time, I've been a supporter of responsible party government. because I believe that the people ought to be able to vote for what they want to happen. And I don't think government's willingness to come across and do what the party said they would do when they ran for election ought to be contingent on the personality and the independence of the members of that particular party. I think that members, elected representatives of people, ought to be required to subscribe to the agenda which was responsible for their election in the first place. That's what Canada has. That's what Great Britain has. That's what many of these democracies in Western nations have. By responsible, what that means is that the people know when they vote for a party what it stands for and what it will do if elected. Why is our two-party system so much different than everybody else's? And I would suggest to you the answer to that question lies in the history of this nation itself. This nation is the newest nation among major powers in the world, relatively speaking. We don't go back generation after generation after generation. In a sense, our nation was populated by people who came here from many other countries. It was our population is a hodgepodge of different religions, races, nationalities, ethnic groups, etc. Somehow, we have had to fashion
We have apparently lost our connection with Dr. Bill. We'll have it back shortly.
I believe we're back on the air, and I apologize. I think we went offline there for a moment for some reason.
We're back, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And so the only issue, it seems to me in our history was that more than any other nation in the world, we have had to fashion a citizenry. We have had to find a way to build a sense of community from a population, a diverse population, where community is not a given, but it can only be created. And that has meant that we have had to basically build a sense of consensus. And our two-party system has done that. Our two-party system is a major factor in the creation of consensus and community in America. And the two-party system that emerged from that reality makes perfect sense. Other nations haven't had to do that. But I think we have reached the point where we're going to have to rethink the whole issue of the nature of our two-party system. Because I think as it was in 1860 at the time of the Civil War, I think our political system broke down. It's kind of interesting if you look at the history of America in the 1850s, and what you find is that it was the national nature of both the Republican, especially the Democratic Party, that held the nation together. There were Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. And, of course, the Whig Party was a national party as well. There were Southern Whigs as well as Northern Whigs. But gradually, the issue of slavery became so emotional that it tended to obliterate the Whigs and drive those that were supportive of slavery into the Democratic Party, and the result was that the Republican Party that emerged was a sectional party. Its only power was in the North. Consequently, if it won, the South could not live with it. So the fact of the matter is the last institution to break down that was holding the nation together is the two-party system. But when it did break down, civil war almost became inevitable. And I think it is particularly important for a number of reasons, because it suggests that the politicians in both parties at the time started to play political games and seek political advantage by focusing on the issue of slavery, the most sensitive, the most emotional, the one issue that the nation could not essentially reach consensus on or reach any kind of agreement on, could not cooperate on. What it basically suggests is that there are certain issues which are so divisive that they do not have any place on the table in our politics. Today, those issues are abortion, gay marriage, some of the most emotional issues which divide us, where there's no possibility of compromise between people who disagree on these things. Madison's position was you do not allow them on the table. You don't debate those. You got to get them off the table and out of politics because they're too divisive. What you have to do is focus political campaigns around issues which bring people together, not divide them. Thus, the basis for separation of church and state in our society. We are not adhering to the wisdom of our founders. When we have right-to-life parties running for political office, and we have right-to-life people donating money from all over the country coming in to basically buy individual local elections by defeating certain candidates and electing other candidates based on what they believe about some of these issues that ought to be private. We basically have screwed up royally a political system that has worked in this country for 200 and close, going on 250 years. And I think we're paying the price now. We've gone beyond the top of our hour. It's 2 minutes after 5 in the East. Let's pause and take a break of 4 or 5 minutes, and we'll be back with our second hour here at the Virtual Center. I think this is very important. If you are at all inclined to call and offer your opinion on this issue, on this shutdown, I would suggest to you that we would love to hear from you now. It's a perfect time to make your voice heard on this particular issue. I'm Bill O'Brien. This is the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, and I think that's what we're talking about here, is civic responsibility. We'll pause for a break. This is Bill O'Brien. We're back for our second hour on this Tuesday, October 1st program here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We've been focusing principally on the nature of our two-party system as opposed to those democracies that operate on a responsible party government system, where the parties basically run on platforms and issues rather than campaigns that focus principally on personalities of candidates. And, of course, the implication is, in our system, is that the people we elect will function independently and that parties will not control the way they vote. The fact of the matter is there's security and stability in that kind of party discipline, which we don't have in our system. And so, but I think the other side of the coin is that what we have in Washington right now is a degree of discipline in parties that one would not expect. And for the most part, the shots are being called by ideologues on either side of the political spectrum. I don't think our political system was designed to handle anything like this, or in fact that it can function like this. A couple of other issues related to the shutdown that I think are significant, and I think they're worth thinking about. The email that I received on this made the point about the Canadian election and I think we're back online. For some reason, we seem to be getting knocked off. We are, Bill. Okay. We seem to be getting knocked offline today, and I don't know why. I apologize for that. But we are on now, and just a couple of issues that I wanted to raise. There's no question that there's a general sense of frustration that exists in the America. It's everywhere. You can see it in the news broadcasts. You can see it in the media. You can see it in on television and radio programs, on political discussion programs. You hear it in grocery stores and in the workplace and everywhere else, that people are just frustrated and turned off by this whole system. We have a situation right now, according to the numbers, where approximately 800,000 federal workers, so-called civil servants, are being required to stay home from work today without pay because of the shutdown. And the president promises that as this thing goes on day by day, it'll get worse. One of the things that, as I mentioned, I was teaching a class with senior citizens this morning, and of course, one of the things they were talking about is their retirement holdings, their investment portfolios, 401ks, whatever it might be. There's absolutely no question that as this thing goes on, it's going to affect the value of real estate. It's going to affect the value of their 401ks. It's going to affect the market. It's going to affect markets around the world, not only our own. The president made the point this morning that it's going to jeopardize the very tenuous economic recovery that seems to be underway in our society, albeit in a very, very slow, deliberate way. But there's no way to know what the impact on the economy or the economic recovery is going to be as a result of this. It's going to have effects in a number of different places.
Hey, Dr. Bill?
Yes, Bob.
Before you get into much deeper into the subject matter, I wanted to let you know you've got a call online from Toby calling from Texas.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that.
I'll bring him online.
Thank you, Bob.
Doctor, good afternoon.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Thank you.
First of all, I was listening to you yesterday, and I find value in listening to you speak, so I'm going to try to tune in. I just happened across Mr. Kincaid last week, so I'm going to start tuning into you guys as much as I can in the evenings and afternoons. I wanted to talk about our current system of government, and I'm not sure whether I've listened to you long enough to have a complete handle on how you see it. But when I look at America and our political system, I see opposing forces. I see oppositional defiance that call themselves Democrats, call themselves liberal, that call themselves Tea Party or Occupy. But invariably, the powers that be in this country are the powers that serve the corporation.
Okay.
And when you're talking Democrat and Republican, the biggest difference, and I'm not just trying to be obnoxious, but the biggest difference between the two is who the lobbyists make the checks payable to.
Okay.
When we're talking about, let's look at health care, we're talking HMOs, right?
Yes.
They had two plans, as far as I'm concerned. All right, plan one was to do nothing. Don't just do something, stand there, because everything was working great for them. Republicans picked up the ball, and they were going to run with that. Plan D was what the Democrats and Barack Obama did, which is create a system whereby you have to purchase their insurance. I call it the let them eat cakes approach.
Right.
And whether or not you can afford it. And I'm going to tell you up front, starting out, Obamacare is going to seem pretty nice, but what they're going to do is let inflation eat away at all those offsets they're going to give people because they can't afford the insurance, and pretty soon we're going to have a bill we can't afford in trying to maintain insurance, and the penalties are going to get steeper and steeper in not buying the insurance we can't afford.
Okay.
And the whole point in this goes back to the fact that the corporations and the big money are calling the shots. It's writing our regulation. It's writing our tax code. It's creating our trade agreement. And to put a name on it, I call it neo-fascism.
Okay.
And to pick up on your point, I believe you said it was Madison, the conclusion I came to is that, hey, I'm a liberal American, but I got more in common with most Main Street conservatives than I'm ever going to have with anybody, almost anybody that calls themselves a liberal in Washington.
Okay.
And I think the same is true of most conservatives. But the problem is we are geared and have been trained, or however you want to put it, culturally led to believe that the minute you sit down and start talking with a fellow American, the first thing you got to do is identify where you disagree and disagree. And that's what you focus on, and that's what you work on. And that is not what made America great. I mean, there's always been disagreement. There has always been ugly political campaigns. But our founding fathers, if I might take an instance, they were, in some cases, one insult from drawing pistols and pacing off and shooting each other. In some levels, they absolutely hated each other.
Uh-huh.
They managed to come together, bury those differences, put together a constitution, a Declaration of Independence, and a Bill of Rights, having all these disagreements.
Right.
And what I'm saying to everybody listening and to you, my conclusion in all this is we need to sit down with our fellow Americans. As a liberal American who supports Occupy, I need to sit down with Tea Partiers and accept that we're never going to agree on a bunch of things, and that's okay. But we need to figure out where we do agree and work together. One instance, Mitt Romney got up and gave a speech in front of a bunch of Tea Party people before the last election, and he said, corporations are people. And that crowd erupted because it's an insult to suggest that an institution that profits from war but never will ever suffer the pain of going through war can never be put in prison and never make the sacrifices that those firefighters made going into that building on 9/11 is equal to those people. They are not. They do not deserve to be any more than the American Union deserves to be put on that pedestal and be given citizenship. They are not persons. They are institutions. And we got to stop allowing the fact that we disagree based on labels on certain things so we can get nothing done, because we as a people are becoming every bit as dysfunctional as the Congress.
That's a good point. That last point is a wonderful point. And I think you're right. I think when you talk about sitting down and acknowledging that there are issues on which we don't agree, but we need to find the issues on which we do agree, I think that's the key to me, because what that means is the issues that divide us, you got to push them aside. You can't have them right in the center of the table, because as long as they sit there staring at both sides, the sides will never be able to focus on things on which they do agree.
When, I went and I did some work out in Seattle, and out there I ran into a man by the name of Jerry Robeck, who was doing something unique. He was bringing a group of people together, and he was creating a model for discussing issues that would not be evolved into a shouting match. And when I came into the group, it was all liberals. And I listened to what he had to say, and he believed that he had the model that would allow people to come together from various backgrounds and discuss things without it turning into a screaming match. And I said, well, let's put this to the test. We got a bunch of liberals here. Let's get conservatives. So we went out and we actually recruited conservatives to come in. And the first meetings were fairly contentious. And after we got by the fact that I carried the label liberal, sorry, helicopter coming into land, and there were conservatives that carried their labels. When we got by that and we started to be real people, real human beings, a level of respect started to grow. And it was, I got a good friend that led the called the pro-marriage movement. Now, I am absolutely for equal rights for gay people. He really felt like the sky was going to fall if we give these people equal rights. And it really bothers him and concerns him. But you know what? At the end of the day, here's what I know about my buddy Bob. He is a good human being. And when he realizes that the sky isn't going to fall, he's going to lose that prejudice he has against gay people. And he and I still talk. I was in Seattle 7 years ago. We are still in contact. He's still a conservative. I'm still a liberal. But the thing that this guy, Jerry Roback, was doing was building groups of people that learn to respect each other as Americans. And coming away from this entire thing, my message is this. As Americans, no matter what label you define yourself by, gay, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, black, white, Hispanic, Christian, Jew, Muslim, whatever label is important to you, what we have in common as Americans always is bigger if we're willing to sit down and talk about what we agree on. It's okay to identify what you disagree on, but if you make it the only thing you talk about when you get together, then all you're ever going to do is disagree.
It's disagree. Exactly right, Toby. Exactly. And I think that's really what the nature of the two-party system was designed to do, was focus. By driving everybody towards the center, it was saying that even though people disagree ideologically, but, they fall on different sides of the political spectrum, the fact of the matter is there will be more things on which they do agree than things they don't agree. But one of the things that I've noted over the years is that the founders tended to discourage conversations which focused on the most emotional, sensitive issues. And Madison and Jefferson co-authored the Virginia bill on religious freedom. And their basic argument was that by the time you got into the mid-'80s, 1780s in Virginia, there were so many different religious groups there that you had to take religion off the political table, because as long as religion remained a political issue, there was no way that the different religious groups in Virginia could agree on anything.
So they came up with a policy of live and let live.
Of what we call at first toleration, but it's even more than that, because it began with the idea that as long as one was religious, it didn't matter which one. It took a while for people to accept the idea that even if they didn't worship God at all, that they still had a role to play in this society. And that was something that a lot of the religious groups found it difficult to stomach, but eventually they did. And today we put so many sensitive issues on the front burner, and and our candidates are running for office on the most sensitive, divisive issues that make compromise and negotiation impossible. We're destroying the basis of the nature of a political system which is designed to get things done.
But this destruction you're witnessing is design in itself. What you're witnessing, and I really believe this, and I don't mean to be hyperbolic, I put the word neo-fascism in its place. What we're dealing with is the birth of a corporate society where the powers that be are seeking a corporate utopia, where on one side they're going to dictate our laws, our regulation, tax code, trade agreements, determine when we go to war.
I see where you're coming from, yes.
And then they want to privatize the power of government back to themselves, so on one side they're writing the laws, and on the other side they're the ones enforcing them.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're heading in this society, and I think there are a whole lot of Americans, conservative and liberal, if we can bury the hatchet long enough to be good Americans, we can reverse this by standing together. But it's going to take Occupy and Tea Party coming together and figuring out what they got in common, and I'd love to be at that first meeting.
Yeah, wouldn't you ever? Hey, Toby, just one question. Do you think that this shutdown might actually turn out to become a positive rather than a negative? Do you think this might be the occasion for the beginning of what you're talking about?
I can't predict that. I think that if one side or the other gets the blame and one side will get an advantage, at the point the American people are so completely fed up with both sides, then maybe. But here's my thing. In your life, everybody listening, in your life, if you know somebody that is a label different from you, get to know them and be their friend and accept the differences and find the commonality. That is our path out of the mess we're heading into. And I got to tell you, as an American who served 2 enlistments in the United States Marine Corps, I'm terrified for the course this nation has taken over the last 30 years, but especially in the last 15.
I think I agree with you, Toby, very, very much. Hey, listen, it's a pleasure to hear from you, and it's wonderful to hear your point of view, because I really think that there are other people out there that will probably have a lot to say based on what you said, and I appreciate that so much.
Have a good day, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your service in the Marine Corps, and I appreciate your service here at the Virtual Center, because you've said an awful lot. You've given people an awful lot to chew on. I've picked up a number of things in what you said that we don't often hear here, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's a very, very important thing, and I think we pretty much agree on what's necessary. I'm beginning to see possibilities of positives coming out of this shutdown, because I think it's going to force people, the longer it goes, to confront exactly the issues that you talk about. It's kind of ironic that those people, and you're talking about corporations, but it's ironic that those people who are reaping the greatest rewards from the current system are the ones that need to fix this shutdown as quickly as possible, because the longer it goes on and the more pain it causes, the more doubts there's going to be in the general population, and there's more likelihood that the kinds of things you're talking about might actually happen. And there are people who have a vested interest in making sure that that doesn't happen.
Well, for future reference, my opinions themselves have opinions, and I got a lot to say on a lot of issues, but I appreciate your time, and I value what you've had to say in the last 2 days.
I appreciate you very much. Thank you so much. I appreciate your call. Thank you. Thank you, Toby. And
Dr. Bill?
Yes, Bob.
Toby's call having completed, you have Jeff on the line.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Jeff,
Hello?
how are you, my friend?
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Well, I wish you a happy birthday. I think your birthday was yesterday, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, it was Sunday. Thank you.
Okay, so you're about 2 years older than me. Anyway, long story. Here's the deal. I like that last caller because he brought out the part that he was thinking we can bring people together, and I agree with that. I think we're so polarized right now, and I think that this country had a great opportunity, and it was a great country maybe 40, 50 years ago, because the tax structure was such that it really did trickle down. In other words, when before Reagan came to the table, he said it trickled down. He was right, because the tax structure was set up in such a way, if you made $1 million an hour, you paid 98, 95%, and you still kept $20,000 a year.
That's right.
And it was fair.
In the 1950s, that was true. People paid as much as 93% tax rate.
Exactly. But that was by happenstance. It didn't happen because people wanted it to. It just by happenstance. Some smart guys got together, they figured out a tax rate, and they said, this is great. And it did work. But what happened is that they changed that tax rate to 33 1/3%. Then they used the money they're keeping to lobby Congress, and money started to rule the game. And this has not been going on since the beginning of the United States. It's been going on since mankind, since the pharaohs ruled their groups with armies. So the problem is, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, and I've been listening to Richard Wolff, by the way, speak for quite a bit, and he's alluding to how our system, our economic system, our capitalistic system is horrendously falling apart. And if you look what's going on with our political system, and even the way and this is because of you, the Constitution, that I've learned about the Constitution has been written, it's designed to protect the minority. Now, the minority now took the ball because of big money, or because of the economic system, and they're ruling this country and killing it for the wealthiest people to make more wealth because of the insanity or of this the lack of humanity. These people don't care how many people they kill just to make money because the economic system is wrong. Mm-hmm. So, as I say, we need to get people together. I don't care if you talk left or right. If you talk to the hard right person, an honest right person, someone who believes that he believes in God, he believes in the country, and he believes in the right to bear arms and all this nonsense. But he still wants the best possible thing he could for his country. So I'm saying to him, well, suppose we didn't charge the kid to have an education. Well, that'd be great. Well, who's going to pay for it? Well, the system pays for it. Suppose we make sure you had clean air, clean water, and clean calories. Well, that'd be a good idea. This is a right-winger thought. You all agree with me on that. So what I'm saying, the problem is not in our political system, because the political system is controlled by the economic system. The education system is controlled by the economic system. I just came back from Washington this morning. I drove, a 7-hour drive. I was listening to the different news broadcasts as I drove up on Sirius radio. And by the time I got home, my blood was boiling. And then when I hear you talking about, and you're relating this to the Constitution, but you also related, when you speak about the Constitution, you also speak about how it was set up so the minorities have the right, you're not going to hang somebody.
That's right.
But that's what they did. They took that portion of the Constitution and they used money to amplify it, and now they're controlling a small portion of insane people who don't understand that that when they close the government down, people are going to die. It's not better, right, or left. People are not going to pay their bills. People are going to be stressed out, and they're going to hit one another and kill one another, and they're going to blame the wrong people.
That's right.
This is a very, very serious problem, and not because of the rules are. Okay, look at it this way: the government set up a monopoly game, a rule. Now it's like you and I playing war. So we have a rule. If I get a 2 and you get a 4, you can shoot me. But that's only for fun. But when you can really shoot me, it's no longer fun.
It's no longer
fun. My life.
That's right.
So what I'm saying is this government set up. You can put people to work tomorrow. If you have an unemployment rate, just give people less hours to work. And where the money comes from is who are we borrowing our money from? That's the question. When you get into this next 2 weeks from now and they have to raise the debt ceiling, that's going to be another nonsensical thing. There's no such thing as a debt ceiling. Who do we owe the money to? It's to a private concern who set up a set of rules that don't give us anything. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't mean to go on like this, but
no, that's okay. I understand.
I feel so frustrated when I listen to the crap that's going on both right and left sides, and I hear about the Republicans and the Democrats, and I hear about the conservatism. Oh, I'm looking at that we need a humanitarian system that is not a doggy. We need a system that takes care of humanity, and it needs to be on a worldwide basis. And I think the U.S. has a great opportunity to lead the world into some kind of a humanitarian thinking process.
Jeff,
anyway, I'll let you go.
I think you and I agree on that. And again, I think, I may be looking for positives where there really aren't any. But it's going to take...
No, there are always positives. I'm sorry. I agree there may be positives. But during the positives, people are going
to be hurt.
Die.
People are going to be hurt, yes. And the point is that in a strange kind of way, if enough people, unfortunately, if enough people get hurt, then there's liable to be something positive that happens out of this. And the one thing that's liable to happen is that the people who are currently calling the shots will become identified and visible, because I think you're right. People tend to focus their attention in the wrong place here. And traditionally they always have. It becomes very, very difficult for I don't think it's an accident in the last election that video of Romney speaking about the 47% of takers in our society was not supposed to be video. That's not something that they want the general population to hear by any stretch. And that's the kind of thing.
I just want to interject something. I have no problem with a multi-billionaire trying to continue to make billions of dollars, as long as the guy who is working, taking care of a child, or working in a laboratory to try to help solve cancer, or to try to just be a professor, or be an artist, or be a plumber, if they work their 20 hours a week, not 50, not 60, not 70, 20 hours, maybe even 15 hours a week, that they will have education as much as they can possibly absorb. They will have food, which is clean air, clean water, and clean calories, and they will have shelter that's safe. That's the bottom minimum. Minimum, I don't like to call it a wage, a minimum quality for the 20 hours worldwide. If you do that worldwide, you stop wars. And then it highlights the people who are trying to run the country with this psychopathic behavior. But I'm not trying to take, if they want to be psychopaths and work their asses off, enjoy your life, baby. But I want to make sure that the people who are really doing the work have a quality of life.
Quality of life. I can understand that. I can understand that. Jeff, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's good to hear from you. And especially on top of Toby's call, I really think that what you've said carries a lot of weight and a lot of substance, and I thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one. Keep up the work, guy. Keep it up. Bye.
I'll try it, buddy. Thank you. We are at 36 minutes after the hour. We're kind of into our last segment here, our last quarter of today's program, and again I want to thank again those that have called, and I want to encourage those of you to call. We will have as much time as we need in future programs to deal with some of the issues that I'm presenting. I hear in emails from people who say, well, I don't want to call because I don't want to interfere with your train of thought, or I'm picking up information that I didn't know. That will be there. We'll get to that. But the point is that if something occurs to you that you feel is worthy of other people hearing, that won't wait, because once the moment's gone, it's gone. The comment's gone, the appropriate time is gone, the setting is gone, the context, whatever was said that maybe created the idea or the thought or the consideration in the first place may not come back. The stuff that I'm doing will be here. And so the irony is that your comments, your ideas, your suggestions, your concerns, your criticisms actually take precedence over mine. And basically, the material that I'm presenting is material that I think is important for people to have and to know. But it's information that people have gotten to this point in their lives with for the most part, not having it. So another day or another week or whatever is not going to matter. But hearing from you does matter. It's a priority. And I want to thank Toby and I want to thank Jeff for taking the time to give us a call and giving all of us the opportunity to hear their thinking and to experience their thinking and how they look at these situations, because it causes me, as I'm listening to them, it causes me to rethink and reevaluate and revisit some of the things that I may not have thought about before, I may have just taken for granted. The result is I'm learning from that, I'm growing, and so does everybody else that is tuned in here, and that's what we're after, that's what we want. So thank you, and keep it up. And let me take this opportunity for a minute. We're at 38 minutes after the hour. Let me once again make the point that here at the Head On Radio Network, not just at the Virtual Center, but the Head On Radio Network itself, is presenting a point of view and a voice that you don't hear out there. One of the things that I'm going to be talking about in future programs over the next week or so is, given the opportunity, and of course what I mean by the opportunity is if you don't call, the threat that I hold over you is I'm going to get back to this issue of rights and liberties and all the rest of it. But the point is we're going to be looking at the differences between a liberal approach to the idea of rights and what we might call a radical approach. I would suggest to you, for example, in yesterday's program when we were comparing or looking at the Declaration of Independence on the one hand and the Virginia Declaration of Rights on the other, that what we're talking about here is an declaration of rights. We're looking at an opportunity in the state of Virginia to declare or to declaim what man's rights ought to be. That's what Jeff was just talking about in his call. is a world which puts the focus back on on humanity, on the people who live in this. It's all about the people. It's not about the profit. It's not about the bottom line. All of it is secondary to the welfare and quality of life of people. That's what we're talking about. That's what Jeff is talking about as his ultimate goal, and I think that's the ultimate goal for all of us. And so the Virginia Declaration of Rights and Jefferson's Declaration, Jefferson referred to them as self-evident truths. And basically what he's saying is that this is true, that is true, that something else is true. In other words, what they are doing is declaring statements of fact in their world. And they're saying thinking people throughout the world can agree that this is what people need in order to survive and experience a quality of life that is worth having.
Hey, Dr. Bill.
In this, yes, Bob.
Ask and it shall be given unto you. Grant is calling from Portland.
What is the name again, Bob?
Grant.
Grant. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Is it afternoon in Portland? I guess it is. It's early afternoon there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just got 2:41.
Okay, great. Well, we're heading towards the evening here. It's 5:41 here, but it's a pleasure to hear from you, Grant.
Yeah, I've been meaning to call in.
Well,
every time you know the story.
I know the story, but I'm so glad you did.
Well, I had a question. Well, it started with one of the newspapers from New York. I saw the cover of it. Because of the government shutdown and the things that have been going on in Congress, the dissatisfaction with Congress is basically at an all-time high.
Oh, I'm no doubt.
One statistic I heard, it was on the program called The Young Turks, said that 87% of people wanted to flush Congress completely and start over. But the thing that was interesting was that 53% of those polled wanted to start with their own congressman.
That's new, isn't it?
That's huge.
That's huge because traditionally everybody wants to get rid of every other congressman except their own.
Exactly.
You know, I mean that's been a pattern.
Well,
So
this
now
morning,
people turned off on their own. That's unbelievable.
yeah. See, that's the thing. That's why I think we're headed for high turnover in 2014.
Yeah.
I think this is the time for progressives to really strike while the iron is hot and get as many of them into office as possible. Because people are absolutely fed up with what's been going on.
I think we have to basically, and I think, you know, as I listen to what the callers are saying today, this idea of humanity, I think that taking a position in favor of humanity rather than institutions or bottom lines or anything else is a winning agenda.
Yeah.
I really do.
I agree. Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, one of my favorite covers. This morning there was a publication in New York City. I think it's the New York Daily News.
Yes.
Their cover was a picture of John Boehner sitting on the Lincoln Memorial chair, and behind him was this banner that read, "A House of Turds." This is where we're at. Okay?
Yeah.
And this time, I don't think the Republicans are going to be able to palm off responsibility to somebody else. I mean, they've been beating their chest and making such a fuss, owning this thing, that, you know, I think even their amazing logical pretzel factory can't get them out of this. You know, I think they're going to wear this one, which made me think, how, you know, what I'm a little dim on is the history of the Whigs and why they failed, and I wonder how that correlates to the current implosion of the GOP. I was wondering if you had some thoughts on that.
Well, I have some initial thoughts, but I think that suggests a place to go to get more substance, Grant, because and the reason I say that is because my sense is that what killed the Whigs was the institution of slavery, because what it did was give rise to a party which was committed to the abolition or the limitation of the expansion of slavery.
Sure.
And you know, and of course the interesting thing, the extremists within the Republican Party at that time were the abolitionist anti-slavery people who wanted to abolish slavery now, and their argument is it's wrong, it needs to go now, don't worry about what getting rid of it is going to do and the problems that it will create. The fact of the matter is, I'm thinking of people like the so-called fire and brimstone abolitionists who just said if it's wrong, get rid of it now. William Lloyd Garrison and the others. But the more moderate tone is the Lincoln approach. Well, we won't tamper with private property. We won't go where it is now. We just won't let it expand anymore. But the reality is that if you recognize that the slave system was a capitalist system, it had to expand because it was based on more and more agriculture and more productivity for the market and all the rest of it, then to not allow it to expand was to kill it.
Yeah.
So, I think what happened was that as the slavery issue became the driving issue, the Whigs were a national party, and they had been built on it was a pro-business party, but the idea was it wasn't exclusively a northern party. It had very, very strong sentiments in the South. But with the emergence of the Republican Party based on the one issue of slavery, I think it basically killed the inclination to be a Whig, and it forced Southerners to either become anti-slavery Republicans or to become pro-slavery Democrats, and many of them ended up doing that.
Right.
And it forced people to take sides rather than try to find compromise in the middle. That's my initial inclination. Now there may be much more to the demise of the Whigs than that, but that's what I've always believed.
Okay, so that seems to be a bit different than today's situation. I mean, although they are full-service minions of the 1%, the Republicans seem to also go for the more theocratic crowd. But I notice demographic after demographic statistic I see, they're actually becoming more marginalized culturally and everything else. The older guys are dying off. Younger people have a complexion that's just a bit darker than other generations, and things are changing.
And I one of the things that I wonder about is I'm wondering whether the real fire and brimstone ideologues, the Cruzes and the Rubios and that crowd. I wonder how they're going to fare at the end of this, and because they've really led the Republican Party to a large extent into this, and what they've done, kind of like McCarthy in the 1950s. Ted Cruz even looks like Senator McCarthy, and physically, but
that eerie?
Yeah, it's scary, but the fact of the matter is, what they've done is they've made it very, very difficult to not be, to not fall into line. And when falling into line is going to bring this much anti-Republican sentiment to the country, I'm wondering whether, in fact, they politically going to be able to survive this.
I tend to doubt that. Poetic justice would be having them, fall from mightiness into poverty in a system that they legislated into being. It's like
that would be if there was such a thing as absolute justice, that would be called for. But I'm kind of wondering, because the whole idea in this whole thing is to win. I mean, when you talk about they tend to be theocratic in their approach, in their outreach. Basically, what they're doing is they're going wherever they can find support and votes, and because the goal is to win. But the irony is the goal of winning is to govern. And so to basically be in a position where you're shutting down the government and making the government unable to govern seems rather contradictory to everything that they claim they stand for.
Well, that's the part that makes me scratch my head. I'm just wondering how much they've really thought this through. I mean, this works for the Koch brothers, who are trying generally to make mayhem and and all, but I don't see how this benefits them, even as good little minions. You know, I don't see how it benefits them personally.
Right. When I watched the Allstate commercial with Mayhem in it, I'm wondering why the Koch brothers didn't try out for that commercial. But you know, I don't know. I have a feeling. I mean, the whole goal here is to govern with an agenda. And how do you run on a negative agenda? We're not going to let them do this. We're not going to let them do that. We're going to block them here. We're going to block them there. I mean, at some point in time, people are going to say, "Wait a minute, this is suicidal. This is crazy."
You know, the one thing that seems to come with them whenever they take power, they're always setting up these little committees to investigate people. It's like some kind of fodder for their own propaganda mills.
Yeah.
You know, Bachman was, or 1L Michelle Crazy Eyes was talking about doing witch hunts, you know, for un-American activities. And she, you know, for some ungodly reason, she went into the Intelligence Committee.
Yes, yeah.
You know? Scary thoughts, scary people in scary places, you know.
Yeah, very much so. But a lot of that diverts the attention from what they are saying and what they're doing, as well. I mean, I mean, you know, I keep thinking of President Nixon during Vietnam. For him, Vietnam was a diversion. It took attention. It took focus off what we now know was Watergate. I mean, what the things that were going on in that administration, and so there were all sorts of diversions created in order to take people's attention, to focus people's attention in other directions other than the one that really mattered. So it's hard to tell whether that's what they're doing or not. Yeah.
So that explains how we get an unindicted car thief, you know, basically investigating Benghazi.
Yeah, but maybe in a sense we're giving them credit for more intelligence and more insight than they really have. I don't know, but
somewhere up in there is a bug brain doing something.
I got to tell you that the data that you opened with, especially the 53% who want to begin by ousting their own member of Congress, is astounding. Congress they're going to have to respond to this because that is new stuff.
Yep.
That is brand new. Listen, I appreciate you calling so very, very much, Grant. And can I ask one question? Are you having as much rain as the weather people are saying?
Yes. We had a little bit of a break today. But I think what we did is we caught the tail end of a typhoon that was out in the Pacific.
Oh, my heavens. They were talking about 8-9 inches of rain and, you know, in 36 hours and all that stuff. I couldn't believe it. Which is ironic because in other parts of the West, it seems like it's a drought. People are water in the wells. So you know, and we had children and grandchildren in Seattle, and my wife and I made 3 or 4 trips out there in the last several years. Now they've been relocated. They're military people, and they've been relocated to Connecticut, and we've been up there a couple of times. But I still have this very, very warm feeling for the Northwest, and you know, I really, I mean, other than the rain, I absolutely love the area and the people and everything else. And when I saw the weather that you were having, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, actually, you know, in parting, I mean, it's kind of another subject, but the main thing I'm worried about is Fukushima, Japan, and its impact on the Pacific Northwest, because we are directly around downwind from them.
Yes.
And there was a big spill today of water into the ground of radioactive waste. So I'm keeping my eye on that, just kind of seeing how it precipitates. There's nothing I can do about it. But
I can understand. Grant, it's wonderful to hear from you. Thank you so much for calling.
Thanks for taking my call.
I know people listening appreciate your call as well. Thanks a million, and I hope we'll talk again. We are at 54 minutes after the hour, and we've got about 5 minutes left before Bob Kincaid fires up at 6 on his program in the evening. And I want to thank the people that have called today. It's a wonderful experience, and after the amount of time that we've been here at the virtual center without people calling, it's a day I'll remember. I've really enjoyed it, and I just want everybody who called to know how much I appreciate their willingness to pick up the phone and take the time to make themselves heard and give people out there an opportunity to hear another opinion and point of view besides mine. I really want that to happen more and more and more. And as I say, whatever I have will wait a day. But what you have to say has to happen now or it doesn't happen. And so I really do encourage those of you listening to pick up the phone, because even the people that are listening on iPods and who are following these programs in the archives and picking them up a day or a week later or whatever are going to appreciate the comments and the opinions and the point of view and the intelligence that our callers clearly bring to the table, and I appreciate it so very, very much. In tomorrow's program, I'd like to, and of course, a lot of this depends on what might happen as far as the shutdown is concerned in the next 24 hours. But assuming things stay pretty much as they are, what I'd like to do is revisit in tomorrow's program the program we did yesterday, talk a little bit about the issue of rights, the idea of unalienable rights versus the idea of civil rights, because I think it is incredibly important. What I did this morning, and what I had thought we would spend some time on today, but we'll do it another day, is I went back and got a copy of Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration. Because the first thing that occurred to me yesterday is that there is a month separating the Virginia Declaration of Rights of June 1776 with Jefferson's Declaration in the first part of July in Philadelphia at the Second Continental Congress, when the Declaration is drafted. And there are a number of bills of rights coming from states, from the 13 states, all over the place, because when independence is declared, many states at the time before independence, they are colonies, are holding local town meetings and county meetings and coming up with remonstrances and statements about what they believe government ought to be and what they believe individual rights in this republic ought to be, and they're submitting them to the Continental Congress. And so I believe that in her book, Pauline Maier, who, by the way, unfortunately passed away very, very recently, Pauline Maier, in her book on the Declaration of Independence, makes the point that I believe there are 37 different versions of bills of rights that have surfaced during this period at the time that the Declaration of Independence is declared. And so the founders have an awful lot to go on, because the people of the nation spoke in a variety of ways. And the more we can tune in to what those people said, the more we're going to have an idea as to what the intent at the time was in relationship to the issues of human rights, of individual rights, as opposed to civil rights. I think the wording of the American Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to our Constitution, is very, very significant. Because when you look at the Declaration and you look at the Virginia Declaration of Rights of June 1776, and every one of the 19 articles or sections of that document begins by saying, here is a statement of the rights that must become the basis and the foundation of good government, that this is true, that that's true, that something else is true, etc. And then you look at our Bill of Rights, and the first one begins, Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of religion. The implication there is that Congress is claiming the right to, is not stating fact. Congress is voluntarily limiting itself. I think that's very significant, because the power that's associated with that is significant. We are at 59 minutes after the hour. It's time for us to sign off and to leave room for Bob Kincaid and his program here on the Head On Radio Network. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I'm Bill O'Brien. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you so much. Thanks to those of you who called. We'll be back, and we'll give it another go tomorrow. Same time, same channel. Thank you very much. Please be safe. We want to make sure that you come back and join us. I'm Bill O'Brien. Have a good evening.